All right, welcome to another episode of Energy Bytes. We got Brian Weaver here from Liberty Energy. He's the head of software development and data architecture. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we got John Calfan here, the rad dad. Yeah, with the torn up backyard from the.
Yeah, we're dadding today. Collins is at the office with me. Jake's kids are here. His wife's here. No one has power. It's fun. But yeah,
energy's kind of important.
Yeah, shocker. You know, my daughter was like, "It's not cold in the house." I was like, "Yeah, that's because we don't have power."
Yeah,
all that stuff I've been telling you about how important energy is. This is why.
Yeah, see, it's not coming from the wall right now.
Yeah. The magic isn't happening anymore. But no, we're all good. We got power back last night. I know people are probably not going to have power for potentially days to come. So,
you mean the people with like the transmission lines that are just folded in half?
Say hi. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Speaking of,
she doesn't want any part of that. There she is.
She ran away. Yeah, no, those were crazy. I've never seen transmission lines like just crumbled up like a piece of paper before.
Yeah, downtown Houston looked like a war zone. You got windows blown out, and it's insane. But well, cool. But Brian's in Denver, so it's not his problem.
No, we're pretty boring here when it comes to that stuff.
Well, awesome. So, how are things going over at Liberty Frac?
Doing well. It's been a busy year. Had quite a bit of growth over the last few years, buying some companies. Bought Schlumberger a few years ago. That was a pretty big integration. So everything's kind of nice and boring, which has been a little unusual in our company. We're finally at a steady state for a little bit until we do something else. Although we are moving to Australia. We're sending a fleet currently over to Australia right now. So
very cool. Do you have anything else international currently, or?
No, mostly Canada. So we're really more of a North American service company, and this is kind of our first dip into the international waters. Although we are, and I guess we have some stuff looking at in Central Europe.
Okay.
So we'll kind of see how those go and if that expands.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't know if there'd be any Vaca Muerta or anything like that down in South America or anything, but.
Yeah, that's the other big play these days. I think I just saw some production stats coming out of Argentina that are pretty impressive right now. So.
Yeah, I think was it Ted Cross who we had on the show? I think he released some of that stuff, and yeah, definitely looking really competitive, at least with the Bakken or Eagleford, if not the Permian. So
just the rock though, like I mean, it's so much bigger. I feel like anything we have stateside. Yeah, the Eagleford has been prolific, so is the Bakken, but the Vaca Muerta, like, just looking at the thickness, right? Like there's sections that are thousands of feet thick. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, and then we've talked about this too, but I mean the advantage of being that, I mean, not even fast follower, but even more of a laggard. But I mean, they've let us take 10 plus years to 15 years of learnings. Now they can go in and again, and then they don't have all the land complications like we have here. So it's not like you have to worry about a unit line well or this crossing over and everything. It's no, I mean, if you want to drill 3 miles, drill 3 miles. If you want to stack them, wine rack them, however you want to do it, you can do it. So.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It's a huge opportunity. Hopefully the government can stabilize and make it more attractive for a lot of companies down there.
Yeah, especially, I mean, I think we've always said too, oil field services is kind of one of the limiters there too. Like, the economics work here because you can do it affordably. But, as soon as you start needing, you guys or Halliburton or someone to mobilize or set up a fleet down there, it becomes a lot more expensive just what you're going to charge, for that stuff. So.
Yeah, I worked in Australia for a year, and that was one of the challenges they had there was they don't have that, entrepreneurial, like when we have a problem in the United States, a company pops up, solves that problem. Down there, it's tougher. Like you just can't jump on that stuff. And then the other issues in some of the international markets are logistics. We have a rail network that can move pipe and sand and whatever we need pretty fast. Keeps our costs low. Over there, it's a terrible road to drive out there, and it's some truck driver, and you hope he makes it, and it's much more challenging.
And sometimes you have to hire the locals as well, right? So I mean, then the training issue, which I know we're getting saturated here. We got training issues as well. Just got green hats all over the place on the frac fleets and on the drilling rigs. But so I mean, I think this might be a good foray. Like jumping in on some of the tech side of it, we kind of sometimes just handle this kind of non-linearly. We'll kind of work backwards. But I mean, with you guys expanding, say, into Australia or even like Central Europe, I'm sure you've got, telecom type stuff set up here where you're, streaming data, and I know you do, and all that going on. But, how is that going to change maybe from your side, from the data and data architecture and that side of it? How is that going to affect, or how much are you guys even going to focus on that side of it moving into those markets?
Yeah, we do focus on it. The biggest, as you mentioned, the biggest issue is connectivity. Starlink is getting there, but it's not there everywhere in the world yet. Even in Australia, we only get like 8 hours of coverage where our fleets are going to be at.
Wow.
Although they're about to do a launch here and this summer, that might help some of that coverage. So, but there's no cell phone towers out that way. The nearest town from where we're going to be is like an hour and a half drive. So the remoteness does add a lot of complications. We'll still collect the data. We'll still be able to process it. It just might not be as in real time as we've been doing in the past.
Okay.
But once we have that connection, everything else is in place. Really, the biggest issue is the connectivity. Everything else pretty much flows pretty seamlessly with the cloud infrastructure we run.
Nice. And is that, so even like stateside, do you focus heavily on the satellite now that you have some of the low orbit stuff like Starlink and all that stuff, or do you try to leverage cell phone where you can, cellular where you can? Or
yeah, it's a bit of a mix. Really, whatever's the best signal we'll leverage. So we do have these boxes that kind of switch between both Starlink and cell phone coverage. For example, here in Colorado in the DJ, we have ridiculously good 5G coverage in our field. West Texas definitely has spots, but it's a huge basin. It's not fully covered. So I think we kind of flip between the two. But I mean, when I started in the industry 18 years ago, we never had cell phone coverage. We had a sat phone that cost $1 a minute that we're told never to use unless you had to, kind of thing. Now it's the complete opposite. Everyone's out there on their phones. We're streaming quite a bit of bandwidth out there, both personal and for work purposes. It's definitely, like, as far as connectivity, it's amazing how far we've come in 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm operating off of a 5G home internet, and I'm getting 300 megabytes in my house. Because I moved out of the country, and the best hardwire they had was 50 megs. It's like, that's not going to cut it. And
Right.
Verizon 5G, there's a tower right here, and I can stream 300 megs from my house with just a cell modem. Essentially, it's crazy.
Yeah, the rural areas are really. I mean, we try to invest all that infrastructure in putting copper out to the rural areas, but satellites like Starlink and some of these others, the 5G stuff is basically going to replace it all.
Yeah.
I mean, John and I were kind of on the pseudo frac side. I guess we're doing about 7 years ago, and we barely used satellite only in a pinch, and it was slow and it was expensive. And I mean, again, we're talking 6-7 years ago.
It wasn't Starlink either.
Yeah,
it was all the incumbents that would just murder you over their data policies and plans, and it was terrible all around.
Yeah.
Like, you'd have to set it up ahead of time. You couldn't have any kind of active switching, all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, well, I worked for a microseismic company, Pinnacle, quite a few years ago, and we had satellites, but how we did it is, we're pulling geophysical data, so it's huge quantities of time series data coming in. And we had a trigger processor on the equipment, and then we only sent those, what triggered events were sent back for processing. And we literally shipped the rest of it on a hard drive because it was just large quantities. There's still folks out there still doing that, because when you get into the, terabyte, even, higher than that, it's hard to do it over the internet.
Yeah.
And do you really need that information, in real time? Yeah.
Yeah. Most of those hard drives ended up in a closet somewhere anyways, locked away for it, just in case reasons.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, again, I think probably make some assumptions. John and I are pretty familiar with the frac space, but, could you kind of elaborate on like the type of data that you guys are, capturing and just kind of like how it's being used, like as far as like Liberty goes? Because I mean, there's obviously a lot of vendors, like even on RDS where we were at, still will do some frac data capture, and there's Cold Bore and Corva and all these different people. But I mean, I remember it was probably 2018, 2019, and you guys were kind of on the forefront of being a frac company that was actually capturing this data, and I think we're putting it in a Tableau dashboard and some of that stuff. So can you kind of just give a high level about how you guys are, pulling data in and how it's being used, how it's being served out?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of our advantages, we're a pretty young company, so we don't have a lot of data debt, like the old legacy stuff. So we've been capturing it in databases for pretty much from the beginning, or we were able to get it into a database pretty quickly.
So novel concept.
Yeah, it's really nice because I've worked for large service companies like Schlumberger and Halliburton, and yeah, some of their stuff is in closets, like I just said, never to be found again. But yeah, we really focused on, there's kind of two main sets of data coming from the field operations. One is collected by our field engineers, so they collecting different points, they're collecting volumes, averages, they're doing some calculations for the clients. All that stuff is captured and then sent back within about 5 minutes of a stage ending back into our cloud infrastructure. That data we've been collecting since the beginning in different forms.
I want to ask you about that because when I was a frac engineer, that was a post-job report, right?
Yep, exactly.
In one of the 3 original, Excel workbooks that everyone copied and took to every new frac startup that existed after that. But one of the that has all of the good data in it, essentially, right? It's all the summaries, all the averages,
the most important data
right?
Set,
it's all the important data. But we would put it in Excel and then we generate a PDF and then ship it off to the client because that's what they wanted then. Mm-hmm. How did y'all? Are y'all doing that in like a form-based workflow now, or is it still very similar where it's it goes into some kind of standardized document and then you guys are able to parse it on the back end?
No, so I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, one of the engineers started exporting that data out in an XML format. So basically we captured what was in Excel, put it into more of a structured format, semi-structured format. And then it was sent to a person in Houston. She kind of managed the processing, the intake. So she was also the kind of the QCer of that data, making sure it came in, correctly. But that was, once we got it into an XML format, that really accelerated that databasing to where we do a lot of kind of, decision making off of that data. So a lot of executives, a lot of salespeople, a lot of folks pay attention to that data, including our clients as well. So that's all that post-job data is very quickly accessible to us. Recently, we started moving to more of a JSON type structure that we're pulling that data out with. And that's becoming a little more real time. So as the projects or the stage is going on, we're collecting that data periodically throughout the stage. And then once the stage is all wrapped up, we kind of get a trigger to let us know the stage is done, and then that gets dropped into our database. So yeah, we've been pretty fortunate. We did start out that same way where it was sitting in an Excel document, and it was pretty challenging to get that data out, but we quickly pivoted from that. So anyways, that's kind of our main data set, one of our more important ones. We're also getting into streaming of the frac data, so the 1 second data coming out of the frac van from our equipment. That project is, relatively new. We kicked it off about 1.5 years ago, and it's starting to gain traction now. So that's from the field engineering side. That's, kind of our main data set. We also collect telemetry data off of our equipment for maintenance reasons. Caterpillar has been really helpful on that side of things. We're able to capture, engine diagnostics, transmissions, power ends, things like that are all captured, sent back. And then now that we're getting into electric or electrified fracs, we're getting even more data points from that data set. So all of that data gets dropped into an influx database that we use for a lot of our kind of diagnostics on our equipment and trying to do our preventative maintenance. And that's probably one of our true big data sets that we capture from the field. And then we're a large enterprise.
What's the resolution on that? What's the
I think the frequency is about 1 hertz on most of it. We do process it because some of the stuff you don't need 1 second, resolution on that. So we kind of do averages over time, and that kind of makes the data a little more manageable for analytics. But like I said, we're also a large enterprise. So we're collecting data from our ERP systems, from our HR systems, sales systems, things like that. So that's been one of our big things, is trying to get that all kind of accessible to the company where it needs to be.
Nice. So, all right. Obviously, there's a lot of ways I would like to go with this as a data guy. But you brought up InfluxDB, which I don't think we've had brought up on this on the podcast yet. And one of the big things we always try to do is like highlight some different technologies that people are using that people may not be aware of. So, can you kind of give a breakdown for people, like what is InfluxDB, and why did you guys choose it, and what are the advantages?
So Influx has a few advantages. It's a true time series database. That's what it's built for. And when you do queries out, you can kind of truncate that data or bring it in ways that aren't in time series format that are actually usable, especially when you're talking about, like, if we have 1 second frequency over 6 months, it's not reasonable to bring that into a BI tool. So Influx gives you tools and the query engine that allow you to pull it out in much more manageable ways. It's also optimized for storage. So if the value doesn't change from the previous second, it just doesn't store it. It leaves it blank, and it's assumed that it's that value before. So if you have something that's sitting at 120 degrees for 3 days, you're only having that data point once. So it's a very ingenious system for time series data, where it's optimized for both query engines and for the storage of that data.
That'd have been helpful, John, when we were messing around with defits, and every engineer was telling us, "Well, we need 1 second data. Like, what if it changes? Like, it's not changing. It hasn't changed a PSI in 5 hours." Yeah. But
especially defits in these tight shales that could take forever to wait for a closure.
That's the best part. Is they want. Well, Bobby and I were building our dashboard for this because we had the ability to stream this data, and so people don't need to see the 1 second fall off of a shale,
and you literally can't put that many pixels on the screen.
That was the fun part, right? Like, we were capturing all the raw data, and then Bobby and I came up with a little filtering method. Ultimately, basically same thing that the database does. If it doesn't change more than 0.023 or whatever the thousandth
threshold
PSI, then don't add a new point until it does, because there's only so many pixels on this stupid screen. And 1 second, 1 second data for a month, you can't even open in an Excel sheet, right? Like, which is of course what every end user wants to do.
Yeah.
And so, it's people don't. Those are all the things, like, people just don't know until they get into it, and they're like, "Oh man, this is a lot."
Time series data is probably the most challenging data that we deal with. Just how do you manage that scale and make it reasonable for analytics?
Right. That's the thing, right? Because ultimately you have to visualize it, because that's how humans use data, and or that's the easiest way for them to make sense of it most of the time, especially on like a frac job, right? Where it's like, okay, I need to know, and then it's not just we got lucky, because for us it was just pressure and rate most of the time, right? It was just 2 data streams. It wasn't 50 different frac channels, and then wireline and pump down, and then all the equipment information too. Like, I can only imagine how much fun that is for you guys. But I am glad to hear y'all are pulling all the equipment data too, because as someone who was a frac engineer, like, I thought it was I came from the manufacturing. Well, my 2 internships before I got in the oil field were in manufacturing, and so I was hammered 5S, Six Sigma. I would literally stopwatch everything, trying to shave seconds off of the process or minutes, and then I get in the oil field, and it's like, oh, we don't monitor. We're writing, the last time the valves and seats were changed in chalk on the pump, and that's it. And then each supervisor goes by and checks it when they come on location, and that's our analytics. You're just like, oh, okay, there's lots of room here to because everyone wants like the shiny cool stuff, but it's like, what also sucks is being shut down because your pumps need maintenance and you didn't do the maintenance.
Or, that's a good way to lose a contract.
Real quick.
Well, and then the scale of those seats and valves gets pretty big when you're at our size. And so if we could extend it one more stage, or whatever, without costing downtime, then it's pretty valuable to us. So we try to capture everything we can on that side.
That's the thing. Like, the scalability of frac is so crazy when you really start looking at, like, putting the numbers together. It's like, 5% on one stage, not that not that huge of a deal. But 5% on one stage times how many stages are you doing in your as an operator this year?
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of money. That's millions of dollars more than likely.
Well, I mean, I think outside of the industry story that was similar was I think I remember hearing, how, like all the bottle caps are a lot thinner now than they used to be, like on a water bottle. Like someone's just like, what if we can cut those in half? I mean, again, it seems ridiculous on a one bottle scale, but then as far as for Coca-Cola or whoever else, like that's a huge savings over thousands or millions of water bottles or soda bottle. It's wild.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember I was working for Encana when I was a field engineer, and we finally asked them why they wanted this 15-minute pressure drop watch at the end of each stage. Like, what are they using it for? And they're like, oh, it's just a nice to have. And I'm like, you realize that's costing you a stage a day. Like, how much time we're sitting here watching the pressure drop. If you're never using it, we can get a well done in, a week faster, or a pad done in a week faster. And like,
that's wild.
Oh.
Yeah, I did.
Didn't think about that.
When Bobby and I worked at RDS, and we were working on new products. And one of the ideas that I had was, just automating the chemical process to it on the frac side, at least the logistical side of it, right? It's like, we've got these totes. We know how much is in the tote when it arrives. We know how much we're using from the tote from the LAS directly. And yet, there's have so many stories of just sitting there looking out my window, and there's like 10 sand trucks because we screened out and no one told them. And so they're charging us to merge now. And it's like, there's so many optimizations in the frac side which is cool because, there's significant like real world improvements that you can bring. Some much more easier than others, but
our ability to put sand into a well, like for the cost that we do it now, is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Like the volumes that we do, and you look at the frac tickets now, and it's not much different than it was when we were putting a tenth of the sand in the well. Right. So we're seeing huge cost savings, and it's all from stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and they got rid of pumping ceramics and resin coated and all the expense. I remember my cost for ceramic I don't even remember whose it was. At one point, my cost for ceramic was $1 a pound or something insane like that. And it's like, I can't even comprehend, of course it was all engineering driven, right? We didn't know better, but why not try? Like it took EOG coming along, pumping their leftover material for everyone to, they didn't come out and say it, but it's like 100 mesh is a byproduct of 4070, which is what they were mining at their sand mine, and they just had a giant pile of it, and they're like, hey, it's free. I guarantee you that's what happened. Like, I have no idea because, of course, EOG doesn't talk about anything, but, it's like, why not? Let's just see what happens. And sure enough, permeability of sand is greater than shale. Doesn't matter how good the sand is.
Our rock is so terrible now, it really almost doesn't matter what we're pumping down there. It's going to be better.
Yep. It really, I feel like our industry is very good at overcomplicating things a lot of times, and that is one of those that is absolutely true. It's like, we definitely over-engineered that for years.
Yeah. I mean, we went from a very engineering-driven industry to more of an operations-driven industry in the last 10 years. And it had to. That's the only way shale's competitive. Mm-hmm. But we're more of a manufacturing kind of mode at the moment than we are explorers and, doing the technical work. We'll probably be explorers soon. We'll have to find the next shale. But
so I want to kind of get into your background, but like we'll work back from like because this is your second stint with Liberty, correct? Mm-hmm. But talk about you came in, looks like 2021 as a data engineer and architect, but I don't know if I'm not really seeing much of that ahead of that. So had you dipped into data ahead of that, or and then also just kind of like, can you walk us through like the journey from 2021 through to here? Because it looks like you were a big part of implementing a lot of different technologies at Liberty. So just kind of curious on your journey to the data side. And then if you want to talk about some of the different decisions and why you chose things to implement and everything, it'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it might not come through, but Liberty is a very data-driven company. We have very technical upper managers. They make data-driven decisions, not purely driven off of data, but definitely data influenced decisions. So we've always had a very strong kind of foundation in that at our company. And when we had the downturn in 2015, we were looking for things to do. I decided maybe this is a great time to learn some more programming languages. I learned some in college, but kind of fell off as I became a field engineer. So I started getting into using Python, using databases. I kind of told IT what I was working on, so they threw me a database instance to let me kind of land some of my data. And really how it started, it was I built our quoting engine at Liberty. So kind of how we get our KPIs and our analytics off of each quote. And this data, similar to the field engineering stuff, was kind of sitting siloed in documents. So I built an XML process as well. I kind of exported out that data and then databased it. That led into this whole forecasting process that we built that kind of takes this data, and then we did like a 3-month or so look out at revenues and costs. And it's started off a little rough. We're getting pretty close, but not 100% accurate. So then we started really diving into where those inaccuracies were, making it better. And then we went public in 2000, I believe 17 or 18. Suddenly that became a very big part of my job, was making sure that that forecast was correct. And we drove a lot off of that. The team that I kind of started there is still running that process today. So we took it from kind of a document base to a Salesforce base, took a lot of that logic, those analytics, and just kind of formalized it into an application. So we still use that same process today. So that's kind of how I landed in data. It's something I've always been interested in. I probably should have been an electrical engineer, not a mechanical engineer out of college, because those were the classes I ended up liking the most. But I kind of fell into it, to be honest. It was something I really liked. There was opportunities at Liberty to make Liberty a little bit better through that. And so I started working a lot on it.
Sweet.
That's cool.
And that was your first stint with Liberty, right? So it looks like you were there 2014, 2018.
I started in 2012. So basically,
that's right. Yeah.
I started out as a sales engineer or a salesperson, kind of moved into more of a sales engineering role, and then took over the demand management group, which was that kind of forecasting. Half of my role was forecasting, building all that out, helping the sales team on that. And then the other half was kind of a coordination role between different departments. So we had pretty tremendous growth in that time. So we needed to make sure that sales, finance, operations, we're all kind of on the same page. So that was kind of my role as kind of an intermediary between all those.
Nice. So, all right. So you got kind of started getting into the data and stuff there. And then we could talk about some other stops, but then you came back, it looks like 2021.
Yeah.
So can you talk about like some of the stuff that the initiatives that you guys had, and, maybe some of the tools you chose and why, and, how it all fits with what you were talking about earlier?
Did you come in? When was the Schlumberger acquisition?
It was right after the Schlumberger acquisition.
So that's another thing I was going to ask you about, was how, not only did Bobby's question, but also how did that go as far as merging,
integrating?
Integrating and M&A. I feel like, especially on the services side, is probably even worse than on the operator side. But
it's I don't know. I suspect it's probably tough on both sides, but maybe I'll touch on Schlumberger real quick, just talk about that. Yeah, the integration, Schlumberger was pretty good at helping us integrate. So they got stock in our company was how the deal was formulated. So they were invested in making sure we were successful. So from that standpoint, it was a lot of work culturally was probably the biggest challenge. It's just different companies. Schlumberger is huge, and they've been around since the beginning of oil services. And so kind of transitioning from that over to Liberty, which is kind of, we're a big company, but we still feel a little bit small compared to something like that, was a bit of a challenge, but I think it, worked out pretty well in the end. We brought over quite a few of their people to kind of run some of the stuff. We were never a wireline company before that. So that was kind of our first entry into wireline. That opened up a lot of opportunities that we had always kind of thought about peripherally, but we tried to stay focused on frac until it didn't make sense, and now it makes sense to kind of be that fully integrated service company. So I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was a lot of work, but certainly worth it in the end, I would say. We also got some of their software through that we kind of looked at, things of that nature. A lot of it we ended up keeping what we had. It's just easier that way.
Yeah.
But we try to plug in, the good ideas where we could.
Easier to integrate theirs than try and rip and replace.
Well, and there was a lot of custom built applications. Right. That's always going to be tougher to integrate.
Yeah.
But on the Liberty side, we've started getting into more of big data. We were kind of siloed into maybe one or two databases. Now we're really expanding into other databases, other cloud infrastructures. We're primarily in Oracle and AWS, but we have some GCP, we have some Azure. So how do you integrate all of those technologies? And when I came on board, my CIO was like, we can teach you that stuff, or you can learn that stuff. It's harder to learn Frac. And so having kind of that background in especially the history, being here from essentially the start of the company, really helped kind of understand the challenges that we had. And so a lot of the projects that we've been working on recently is how do we get that data accessible quickly across the company? And we had been doing some of that through replication, and now we're trying to get away from that. How do we just expose that data from its current, where it's living right now, and ingest that into where it needs to be? So that's been a lot of our initiatives. We also started building some new infrastructure like Snowflake. A lot of our customers already had Snowflake. We were looking for a platform to do data sharing on. Snowflake was ridiculously easy to get spun up. I think I had a POC running in about 2 hours, which is nuts for something of that scale. And so that was an easy win to kind of get that rolling. Still going today. We're trying to build that out and make it a little more prevalent in our infrastructure.
Can you talk about that process real quick, just for people that may not be aware? Because I don't think we've talked much about it, but we've talked about different ways of data sharing, and obviously people are familiar with REST APIs and FTPs and emailing CSVs. But like you said, full disclosure, that's kind of how we got this podcast set up. Liberty's doing that for Grayson Mill, and again, can you just talk about what you need, like 3 pieces of information from your client's Snowflake tenant, and then you basically plug it in, and their data's there, for lack of a better term.
So what Snowflake built, and is really truly ingenious, is your data sits in your account, and then when you want to share it, we've set up a view-based security process, a secured view essentially, that if based on the client's account, we expose their data, their segment of the data, to them in their account. So they don't have to copy the data. It's still sitting in our account, but they're now able to access it across accounts. So you don't need any replication. You don't need APIs. You don't need any of that. You just need to set it up on your side, which I think can be done in 2 or 3 clicks. It's pretty fast.
Yeah, I've set it up before. It's stupid easy. Quick to set
Snowflake. That's probably the best way to describe Snowflake. It's stupid easy. They've really simplified cloud databases.
There's also no transfer fees or anything.
Nope.
Right? Yeah, that's
because it's living. Because the storage is decoupled from the compute. So Liberty's technically paying for the storage, right? But then we're just paying for the compute to access it.
Yeah. But the upside to the client is it shows up in their database as if it's their data. They don't have to manage it. We manage it from our side. But then they can integrate it into any of the data that they already have in Snowflake. So it really opens up a lot of opportunities for our clients to quickly do analytics off of that, instead of having to load it into their database and then try to find all the ways to connect it together and things like that. It really simplifies it.
Yeah. And again, we're just writing SQL against it's way easier than having, you need someone in-house who can write some Python, and then they need to be able to make sure they keep it alive, or do they need the retries, and then is data duplicated, and again, I think we've talked about it here too. People underestimate what it takes to serve up a REST API. That's a whole other service that you need to keep up, and you need to have rate limiting, and to have a good API with good documentation. And then you've got versioning, it's a nightmare as well. So something like this, where you can just share it across a SQL database. And again, like you said, Snowflake is such an easy button. Even just to spin up an instance of Snowflake to test it out is just so trivial, and everything just works. it's pretty fascinating.
The only challenge with Snowflake is you have to be a little careful about how you set up your compute, because you can have some cost drift there. But honestly, we haven't had that issue. As long as you're, set up your warehouses correctly, it hasn't been a big issue.
Yeah, no, same here. I mean, I've had some people, well, it's so expensive. How are you guys? Like, it's like, dude, it's not that bad. I quoted a number. It's like, oh, that's all it is. Like, yeah, but if you, and I don't know if you saw, there was a blog, someone had it, but he's like, I saved my company $500,000 with one button click. And basically it was just, but it took him 2 years to convince people that he needed the access, and he went and he just turned down the idle time to the 1 minute.
Yeah.
And now you can actually go sub 1 minute now.
Yeah.
But people, the default was 5 or 10 minutes. So like you could run one 5-second query and then it would run for 5 minutes. Like, but it's always about learning and understanding the technology you're using. Like, if you know how to use it and know what its limitations or, what the different levers to pull, but it's can make your life a lot easier.
Also, going into it, knowing that these are businesses set up to make money, and maybe they're not going to always make it as easy to, it's not out of the box set up to be as cost efficient for you as it could be. So just understanding that, I think, because that's like, that happens all the time. Bobby and I have both had it where it's like, oh, where's this random AWS charge coming from that I shouldn't have? It's like, oh, right. I left the database spun up that I was testing in and forgot about it. It just happens.
Yeah. I think Snowflake is a little easier than some. AWS, like their Kubernetes service, and we'll spin it up and spin it down for you. The spin down, you should be cautious though on the spin down. Maybe wait a little bit. So you have to be real careful about those things.
Yeah, no, for sure. So you're talking about like something like the replication, and that you try to move away from some of that. I mean, can you talk about, because I think, again, I see it on your LinkedIn, you guys were using the same thing we're actually using at GME as Fivetran to replicate some data in there. Really great service. It can definitely be, a little more on the expensive side, but I think you pay for quality sometimes there. Yeah. But is that where you were kind of hinting at you may or may not be trying to look at where you could do less of that, or and then what has been your experience with Fivetran?
Fivetran's been great. You're right. It's another easy button, to be honest. Their services, like as far as replication setups go, it's one of the easier ones. We had that running in about 10 minutes. It's so easy. It's fantastic. At least as long as you're using, standard sources and destinations. Mm-hmm. It is expensive though. You're right. And the other issue that, we've been running into with replication is, you lose a little control over data quality. So it's harder to maintain 2 data sets, and make sure that those 2 data sets line up. There's tools you can do, but then that adds even more cost, because then you're running queries and compares against 2 different data sets. And so we, especially when I first came into this role, we were running quite a few replications that were constantly going down. And so we're fighting, instead of spending time building new things, we're constantly doing maintenance on old things. Yeah. So that's why we've tried to go away from replication. We've started looking at things like Iceberg formats. So Iceberg has a really nice way of kind of consolidating data down into a very consumable size, and then exposing that across databases. So instead of doing a copy over, you expose that data. And if you do need to write it to the database, then you just do a database function that does it for you. Things like that have really simplified how we do our replication. We still have replications running in our company, but we really try to minimize that where we can.
And can you talk for people that may not be aware what Iceberg is? It's a file format, correct? Essentially,
it's a file format. Yeah, that it's an Apache open source kind of format. It's starting to become more accepted across platforms. It's kind of one of those data lake type services that are coming up. The advantage that we've had, like especially when it comes to combining data, you can kind of combine it into chunks. So if you have 1 second data packets coming in to an S3 bucket, you can pull that over into an Iceberg format that kind of consolidates those all into one. So you can kind of think of it similar to indexing on a database, except that you're physically pulling those files together. And then a lot of databases are now, like for example, Snowflake was one of actually the early movers in accepting Iceberg formats. So our engineering data actually goes into an Iceberg format, and then Snowflake views that directly and then writes it to our database. So we have a function that runs every 5 minutes that writes it to the database, and that's how we kind of keep it there. And the advantage of that is if you don't need to do, like if query performance isn't a big deal, you can just leave it in your Iceberg. So if it's not going to be as fast because it's going to become a large data store. But if you do need query performance, then we write it to our relational database where we have that SQL advantage.
So have you guys messed around with like the Iceberg tables with Snowflake? Because I think you can query against your S3 buckets or your blobs, with the Snowflake compute. So basically you're managing that decoupled storage, right? And then you're able to just query it in line, essentially.
Yeah, that's essentially how we built our new process. We were using Fivetran, and Fivetran was replaced with this Iceberg read.
Nice.
So it's living in an Iceberg table, and then I can ingest it into Snowflake.
Sweet. And then also, you said you guys are using Salesforce. Have you messed around? Because Salesforce has it now too, where can't they do like that zero copy into Snowflake?
We have not played too much around with that. Okay. Yeah, I do. I have seen it. We looked into it, but how we're running it now has been working, so we haven't really messed with it too much.
Gotcha. Cool. And then so is everything, essentially going into Snowflake? Like it sounded like you were talking about earlier, you got your ERP, you've got that telemetry, you've got, are you trying to land all that, or even just, versions of that in there and blend it across disciplines where you can, or how's that all?
Yeah. So we're primarily warehoused in Oracle. So we leverage Oracle's size, to be quite frank.
Sure.
Where we can't outgrow it. We use Snowflake primarily for external shares. So both clients and then some of those vendors that you talked about, Well Data Labs and Cold Bore and those folks. We've set up processes through Snowflake that kind of secure that. So, and that's the other part what we really like about Snowflake is it handled the security for us very well. And so that's why we use Snowflake for mostly external sharing purposes. Internal kind of analytics and warehousing, we mostly leverage AWS and Oracle for that.
And are you just like using Oracle like relational databases for that, or Nice?
Yeah, some of that. They also have they do have object storage, is what they call it, similar to an S3 bucket. We do use some of that, and partly it's because we have an Oracle ERP, so it's just nice to be close in that sense.
Sweet. Because we haven't really talked too much about Oracle Cloud, but I think is their blob storage, is it S3 compliant even?
Yeah, you can actually read S3 buckets into Oracle. It's very similar format. I don't know if their object storage is the exact same.
Yeah, because I think GCP, obviously AWS. I think Azure was the one I think for sure was not S3 compliant, but I think there's a handful of like other object stores, from the other vendors that are actually S3 compliant, so you can kind of treat them the same.
Interesting.
But well, cool. And so, anything, what about like on the telemetry side? Like you talk about like, socially, you're going to be going to Australia where you might have 8 hours of coverage and stuff. Are you guys on the IoT side, are you getting down or messing around with like MQTT or different like messaging protocols? And
I was going to ask, are you doing stream, batch, MQTT? What's the
edge processing?
So we're using, so we are both. So we do MQTT within the van itself. We also, and I believe there's a messenger in there that then collects it and then streams it back to the cloud. So we have we're actually using a TIBCO product. So it kind of integrates directly into Spotfire.
Streambase? Nice.
So we're using that product to stream the data out, lands into a database that then we collect and then drop into Iceberg format for long-term storage. So the streaming data comes out in 1 second, packets per channel. So there's quite a bit of processing on the backside to kind of flatten that out. We pivot that data into column format and then bundle that all into a stage file.
Nice. So you said you're ultimately having to pivot it. So like everything's just kind of coming in like kind of tall and skinny because you said it's one packet per stream, per channel. So I think one advantage you guys have in doing that, because again, I'm not aware necessarily of any of the other competitors. I'm sure some of them are starting to do it or wanting to do it, but before it's been at the mercy of again, we were trying to do it at RDS, Well Data Labs started trying to do some of the streaming Corva, Kelvin, you name it. Obviously Colbor is doing a lot of it, but, and, Rivet, but trying to like normalize or come up with like a standard, but then trying to like normalize that. But then like you guys actually have control of the channels, which is a huge benefit. I mean, because are you guys still taking it from a serial stream ultimately, or are you able to get it even kind of ahead of that in a better format? Because I mean, that CSV stream was kind of rough.
Yeah, it's very rough. So we do a mapping within the van itself. So once it lands into the van, there's a mapping that the engineer set up. They should only have to set up once per pad or once through major change, and that's the only time they have to touch it. It gives us a lot of advantages. One, it makes our streaming. So once it's through the filter, streaming's pretty much normalized. We don't have to worry too much about it. The other advantage is we used to have to do a lot of mapping with the third-party companies that are also doing the streaming. It was quite time-consuming in the field. So we're trying to eliminate that by just normalizing everything. So they just plug into the channels. They pull out the data the same way. So no matter what van they're in, it should be the same channels coming back at them, or it'll be named the same. So it makes their side even easier as well. So there's hopefully some cost savings and a lot of time savings ultimately going to that method.
Also, everyone else that's fracking in the world right now, please standardize your naming conventions so that everyone's life is infinitely easier, because it never ceases to amaze me.
There's that third-party group that's trying to do that. I'm blanking on the name right now. They made some headways in the... What's that?
Was it Rivet?
No. It's like it's an independent group. I'm blanking. It's an acronym. I can't remember right now. They made some headways in the geophysical space because those guys all played pretty nice together and just figured it out. But the completion side, we got some big personalities who don't want to change anything. So yeah, there's a little bit of challenges on that side.
No, well, that was the thing. Is it's like I remember I've probably told this story before, but Bobby and I met with a guy at an operator. They hired him to do a bunch of frac analytics and stuff. And the first thing he had to do was write a machine learning model to normalize the naming, all the headers of all the decade of historic frac data that they had. And it's like, yeah, that's a huge problem because no one was thinking about how important, calling even just the chemical names the same thing, right? Like it's just
chemical names, even pressure.
Yeah.
Right. Inline pressure, surface pressure, treating pressure. There's probably more than I don't even know about that. Yeah. So which one is it? What one do we care about?
Yeah. No, it's one of those things. Until you get into it, you just have no clue how messy it really is.
Yeah, that legacy data it's very messy. But no, I'm all for it. I would love it if we all could just start naming things the same, but make everyone's life either.
There's no reason. Okay, we don't have to agree on a format. We don't have to agree on the frequency. We can as an industry come up with, what are we going to call treating pressure? What are we going to call that is the simplest thing in it, and no one has done it yet. And it's just like, just put out a blog post. Here's what we're using. This is what we're going to use. And then if you want to use it, great. But there needs to be, an open source community driven standard that everyone can use, because everyone does it.
We've talked about it before. We've talked about it before too, though. But I mean, even they were trying to get the XML for Frac, which again, sound like Brian, or the WITSML rather, but Brian, sounds like you're a lot more familiar with XML, or don't mind working with it. I hate working with XML personally. But again, it's one of those things, like it's maybe a Stockholm syndrome, but I mean, at least on the drilling side, I think that's where a lot of that growth on the analytics side came from, because they had a standardized format that people knew how to tap into and use, that people could build off consistently. If it's like, well, I've got to build this process if it's a Liberty van, I got to build this process if it's a Halliburton van, and then I guess if a different crew or a different side of the country.
I was going to say, it's not even just the van; it's even the crew, right? Like,
yeah.
It's it's crazy. but yeah, I'm adamant that that's why drilling is probably 10 years ahead of completions on the data analytics automation side, because hey, it's a hell of a lot easier to build any kind of model if all the data is standardized and normalized with the same conventions. Like it's not rocket science, but
no, it's a challenge that I don't know if we're going to figure out anytime soon. I hope we do, but
well, I'm glad you guys.
If you guys have been to Frac conferences, there's literally never agreement on anything at those, especially on paper talks. I don't know if we'll ever agree on this one.
No,
I'm just glad someone in the industry like you guys is at least doing that internally, right? Like just, and ultimately I see that as these are things in my mind that start to become advantages, like selling points almost over the long term, because everything is pushing towards leveraging data-driven decisions. We've been doing that forever, and yet it hadn't seemed like many people. You had Corva, Cold Bore, RDS, Rivet. You have all these people coming in to say like, "Hey, we're going to solve that problem," and it's like, well, it's a hell of a lot easier for Liberty to solve that because it's their stuff, right? Like, it really doesn't make sense in my mind to have a third party doing it when you guys have, like, it's your engineer that's setting it up. He's setting up the tables. He knows the channel mappings. Like, you throw the more people you involve in it, the harder and more complicated it's going to get. But
and the earlier you start on it, the cost savings just trickle downhill real fast. Like if you start with a solid foundation, everything becomes easier, and then you get to the fun stuff, not the boring, horrible data engineering side of things.
Yeah, you're not blowing hours and days and weeks on building language models to normalize the headers for all the frac data. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Well, one thing too, and again, I'm not speaking for our procurement side at all, because I don't touch that. But like, I gotta imagine, and you and John have both been on the sales side of this too. But like, being able to provide this data service around the frac makes you guys a lot stickier too. I mean, like, I mean, obviously, I think there's differentiators, as far as quality of the service and the equipment and everything. But it sounds like that's all a function, or in some way a function of having and using the data to be more proactive than some of your other competitors probably. But again, if I'm able to get a consistent, solid data set from this company, and I don't have to offsource it to a third party to get a good quality data stream, I mean, it's going to make it a lot harder to move off it, when you got some processes and stuff built around that as well. So I think it's just smart from a business side.
Yeah, we're always looking for that easy button for our clients. Like, how do we just make it better and faster and easier for them? And that's always good for us.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, if we're going to work backwards then, so it sounds like, I mean, you got into data with Liberty probably back, 2015, and it's not like you had done a little bit in college, but can you talk about some of your other stops and, kind of how some of those data skills and stuff have translated? Because we've talked a lot about too, like breaking into data, and that sometimes it's not necessarily being in a data role. Like, I mean, I think the last couple of years is your first time truly in a quote unquote data role, but, just how anyone, I think in any, discipline can start leveraging data, and sometimes that's the most important, where you have people that have that domain knowledge and make a change from the ground floor.
I'm a big proponent of that. Like, it's easy in my mind. It is so much easier to teach someone the data side, the stats, whatever it may be, than it is to train them on the years of field experience that you get by sitting in the field. It is so hard to train people on that stuff.
Yeah, I think, when people are looking to get into it, I totally agree. Learn the domain knowledge of your industry first, no matter what. Early in my career, I was pretty fortunate. Someone recommended, they're just like, stay in the field longer than you think you need to. It'll pay dividends down the road. And it really did. I mean, I ran between being a frac engineer and a project manager. I was in the field for about 6 years before I came to the office. So you get all the little experience you get out there. For example, you're talking about sand deliveries and all that stuff. You see the issues that happen out there. You start seeing why this is a big deal. You see where it's coming from. You learn the whole supply chain around that, just sitting in the field, watching it, seeing those problems develop. And that's how you get to be a better, contributor to the business down the road. And then let's start learning the data skills, or learn them in conjuncture. Because there's 1,000 online classes to learn how to do SQL. There's 1,000 online classes how to do cloud infrastructure. There's all of that part is way more accessible than, especially in oil and gas, learning the skills out in the field. And I think the other thing, I mean, if you're truly passionate about data, then start looking for side projects, whether in your company or on your own. You can spin up free infrastructure in AWS or Snowflake or all these other places. Python is free on your computer. You can interact with that data and you can start learning how all of that works. The barriers to entry there are so small. And like I said, I kind of fell into it because I saw data being siloed in Excel spreadsheets and said, we probably shouldn't do that. How do I fix that? So I spent a couple weeks and I figured out a process to fix that. And yeah, it was kind of real basic and my code looks terrible. And I would be embarrassed to show it to anyone, but it worked. And now we have a whole Salesforce process that's very formalized and it works with our ERP system. And there's a whole bunch of things that got built from that simple prototype that got the ball started. So, and the best way to learn it is to jump into a project. You just I'd say on the data side, the best data people I know SQL. It's not going away anytime soon. And it's surprising how many people don't know how to do it. Some people do it through the GUIs, and that's a great place to start. But if you really want to be a power user, you need to learn how to code it. And it's probably the easiest language out there to learn. It's very easy to read. It's really easy to run. So things like that. I took a couple of online classes, like I said, during the 2015 slowdown when we're all sitting around hoping for more work shows up while the Saudis are fighting us over oil prices. So I took that opportunity to learn some new skills, and it really paid dividends down the road.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is just starting, right? Like it doesn't have, like you said, it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be sexy, it doesn't have to be using the latest, greatest new thing. But if it's solving the problem, no one gives a shit how the sausage is made. They care what it tastes like,
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is it's okay to have a really bad first project. Like I said, I would not show you guys my Python code because it's embarrassingly bad. But it led to probably 10 or 15 iterations later. It became much more formalized. And then we threw that whole thing out and took it to Salesforce. So it's okay to build something that is kind of ugly and it barely works and it's hobbled together with duct tape, whatever, it worked. And then now you have the prototype to build something better on your next iteration. And I think that's one thing that people are a little scared of is the failure of your project or a failure of something. And it's not a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing if it barely works. Like at least you got started, the ball is rolling and now you have something to work off of. You learn some lessons that you'll take to the next iteration, move forward quick.
Yeah. They're iterations, not failures. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that, and I mean, that's the natural progression of any coding is like, make it work well, make it work fast, right? I mean, oftentimes you never even have to get that last part. It's probably fast enough because, you run a 10-second script is probably sufficient and it's way faster than like the 30 minutes someone was taking each month to do that process or whatever it was, I think the one thing I learned real quick too, once I started coding was like the reproducibility or the reusability of that. Like, all right, I've done this problem once. You invariably have a similar problem 2 months later. And now I've got a starting point. So now I'm able to implement that faster too. And I think that's the thing too, where we can talk about speed. Is it developer speed or is it the speed of the code? And for me, it's always a lot more about developer speed is more important. Again, if it runs in 5 seconds or 20 seconds, depending on the process, who cares? But like if I can ship a product or ship some code faster the next time and get a solution in someone's hand faster, I think, it's a big deal. And I think that's where people like say if they get stuck in that Excel world, like, well, I copy this CSV from here and I do this and they don't even write a macro to do it, and I move these 5 columns and I run a pivot table. Like, no, like if we can write that as code, we do that once and then we can just run that, let the machine do it. And just all that kind of stuff is super powerful.
That's the case for Python, honestly. I mean, there's way faster languages out there, but you can throw someone out a problem. There's probably a library that solves it, and you can have your code working in an afternoon, whereas you didn't have to write drivers or do all this other stuff.
And shit, now with I don't know if you're using GitHub Copilot or obviously you have ChatGPT. I mean, like stupid little things that you want to put together. I mean, it takes an afternoon into a 45-minute project, or 15. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Like, it's pretty wild.
I've got
it doesn't come out perfect, but man, it gives you the framework really fast.
Yeah. I've got a OneNote, whatever they're called, sheet group of just Power BI functions that I use all the time so that I don't forget them, because I come in and out of Power BI so often and infrequently a lot of the times, and it's like, I know I'm going to need to use this at some point, or I've used it multiple times in the past, so I'm just going to save it here with it's the same thing with code, though. It really is. And like you guys said, I mean, all the libraries out there just make things so much faster.
One of the funny things I do on occasion is I'll Google a problem and I'll see a purple link, and I was like, oh yeah,
that was it.
Had that problem 4 months ago.
Well, that's a funny one too.
Click on it again.
And I don't think he didn't bring it up. We interviewed this guy, JD Long. I don't know if you've ever seen him on social media or not. He's pretty big in the R and Python communities, but I think he's mentioned multiple times looking up a problem on Stack Overflow and realizing he answered it like 2 years before.
Yeah, I mean, people joke like, "Oh, you had to Google it," but man, I don't want to remember all this stuff.
No.
I don't need to remember all this stuff. It's there. I can, at least as long as I can get to it. That's all that's important.
Yep.
100%. Well, great, John. You want to jump in? We'll jump into the lightning round, or
that hour flew by, Brian. That was good stuff, man. So we like to end it with lightning round. We'll just pepper you with short.
A couple quick fun short answer questions or whatever.
Cool.
My go-to one lately has been favorite video or board game. If you're into either of those, you can also say you're not into either of those. So.
No, I mean, I have little kids. That's my board game life. And those are my favorites right now. So, video game that I always kind of fall back to, I'd say I hate to say it, but Call of Duty. Especially the older ones.
Yes.
I just love those. And I like it because I can jump in for 15 minutes, play, and then jump out. And I'm like, all right, I'm moving on to my next thing.
Yeah, I got that scratch the itch. And I'm good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not.
And then some kid kills me, and I'm like, all right, I'm good. Move on to the next. All right, now I have to go mow the lawn and actually do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so you mentioned Python libraries. What's your favorite open source library?
Man,
it doesn't have to be favorite. It can be just useful ones that you think other people might.
Most useful ones.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to be honest, the standard libraries are the ones that I use all the time. NumPy. There's some, the SQL Alchemy. I use quite a bit. And then a lot of times the owners of the databases or the connectors usually have their own libraries, and it's fantastic. Like and I think that's one of the powers of some of these bigger guys. Snowflake's connector is fantastic. I had a Python connected in 5 minutes.
Well, it's wild too. Their integration with pandas, like you can have the Snowflake pandas thing, and you go right from the to SQL, and it just works seamlessly. That's pretty impressive.
I guess pandas is probably the other one. Although I haven't used pandas quite as much as I used to. Mostly because I'm doing data processing, not kind of analytics anymore.
Yep.
Favorite, just some interesting folks that you follow either on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you may be, that other folks might find interesting.
Carly Taylor, I've known her for quite a while. She's over at Call of Duty or at Activewear. I think it's the name of the company, the parent company.
She's pretty tight with Jessica Iriarte, right?
Yeah, I had lunch with her 2 weeks ago with Jessica. So I follow her as well. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. I think Adam Grant is another writer I really like, who's just more kind of general business. He throws nice thoughts out there that make you kind of sit there for a minute and work through it. I've always liked him a lot too. And then
he's got a really good book too, doesn't he? I'm trying to remember what the name was.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one his was. I read it 2 or 3 years ago, which is why I started following him. So
yeah, same.
And then Malcolm Gladwell is another person I tend to follow quite a bit.
Was it Originals? I think there was that. That's one I read of his, but he's got a lot of good books though.
Yeah. Yeah, the other book that I read recently I really liked was Thinking Fast and Slow, or Thinking Fast Slow. I'm blanking on the author's name right now. I read that about 2 or 3 years ago, but that really kind of changed my perspective of attacking problems and how I try to avoid biases in that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, one of the questions we normally ask is about books, so you checked that one off right there as well.
2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah,
yeah, there you go.
You want to wrap us up, Bobs?
Yeah. All right, last one. We'll go. Favorite place to go on vacation?
Oof, that's a great question.
I mean, you live in Denver, so you got it in your backyard.
Practically on vacation all the time, right?
Yeah.
Probably the mountains. I'll be honest. I love the mountains. I grew up here in the mountains. I go up there all the time. I do some larger bike rides, group rides every year up there. And whether it's mountain biking, and then in the wintertime, I love skiing. Try to ski as much as I can in the winter, trying to get my kids into skiing so I can continue to ski.
I need to do that with golf.
Same. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love golf too, but man, if it's between that and the mountains, I usually end up there. But if I'm traveling, probably the beach is the other place. It's nice to just go to a place where you can't really take your phone and you just sit there
disconnect.
For a while. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome, man. Brian, we appreciate you coming on. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks you guys. It was awesome.
Thanks for your time.